I have this weird memories of being really young and getting a magical musical machine, it was called. It was this horrible thing. It was about this long and it just had these buttons on it and it was really electronic sounding and you could just you could kind of run your fingers all over it and do these weird melodies. Really synthetic sound. And I remember just being able to get lost in it, like, oh, you can just go for hours making this horrific noise. And the other thing was I think the other thing was sitting at home on the piano and looking at the bookshelf and having all the spines of these books and National Geographic magazines and playing the book titles. And they had this one on angelfish, a National Geographic magazine about these fish that don't see the light. They have luminous bones and they have this protruding, glowing bone that attracts fish to them. And I remember just playing it on the piano and really freaking myself out with all these dark colours down the bottom, making this really ominous stuff. And it's pure improvisation as a response to these sort of worlds that you saw somewhere else, and thinking, it never seemed to pose a problem that you could take music and just channel it, make it your own, put out your own feeling about something you saw around you. It always seemed like it was pretty easy too, music. It was like, oh yeah, oh that tune, oh yeah, that goes like that, or oh I can remember how that one goes, or it was quite it felt natural. It felt totally like a simple, natural thing to do. I think those were the things that made me go, oh, this is something for me. That would have been maybe 6 or 7, I think, when I was playing my magnum opus to the National Geographic spines, was probably an age around then. And I remember as well tone, like being really... I had this little guitar that was a steel string guitar. I don't know if it was meant to be a steel string guitar, but I just remember it had this really bright, clear sound. And then afterwards playing other people's guitars, and I was like, oh, I don't like the tone of that one, and then hearing other pianos, like, oh, this one's really dull and this one's really bright, and this one's got this richness that I really like. And I think noticing also walls, when you drum on a wall, wow, this wall sounds really good and this one doesn't. And someone had like a pressed tin wall, I think, at their house, and I remember playing it, probably driving my mum up the wall, but just playing this sound and this rhythm. And there was this is the place where it sounds really good. And car seats as well, you could hit them and they had this really bass boom to them because the closed in box of the car and the big sort of taut drum of the seat. I remember learning Chariots of Fire and going and playing it on the piano at school, and these kids were like, oh wow, that's that song we know, and you could play it and it was so simple. And someone saying, do you want me to play the accompaniment bit to it? And I was like, no, I don't want you to do that at all. I just want to keep doing it. And so I think the first time I realised, oh, there's a thing you do together, was with a band. And we had a punk band, and there was like 3 of us. And I'd seen the documentary on punk music and thought, fuck, that's amazing. And so we started to try and do these songs, Dead Kennedys songs and Sex Pistols songs, Anti-Nowhere League, and we were getting it all ready for the school dance that we were going to have, trying to figure out how to get around the teachers to be able to play some of these songs. And then we were practicing, and it was like, no, it doesn't go like that, it goes like this. We're kind of doing that thing where you figure out how the song goes, and then we started to play it and it just took off, and the drums were going, the guitar was going, it was all meshed in together into this sound. And almost too much. Like we almost had to stop playing because it was such a moment of power. Of fuck, it's all come together. This is how it's done. This is how bands play, and that was great. That was a real lights on epiphany of the alchemy of musicians and what happens when they come together, and how the sum is greater than the parts. That was a really great moment. So I guess I was probably 13 or 14 maybe when we did that. I had a friend, I guess this was the first time I really connected in with New Zealand contemporary music. Was this friend of mine won 3 passes. He figured out how to ring up the radio station in a lightning flash, so he just aced these kind of competitions they would have, and he won 3 passes to orientation week. So we were too young to drive, or we kind of snuck out every night, but he would, I don't know how he did it, somehow he advertised the fact that he had a pass. I think it might have been back on RDU, and he said he would he could get somebody in who could give us a ride to orientation week. So me and him went, and we got a ride from some guy called Ian, I think his name was, and we just went we sort of snuck out every night and went to see, I think we saw Chris Knox do a solo show, we saw Headless Chickens, we saw Belter Space, and we saw Snapper, and we saw the Go-Betweens were there, they came over, and we saw the John Paul Sartre Experience, I think. It just seemed like we saw everybody in this week of who was really working in this fruitful, lush time of New Zealand alternative rock and roll. And it just kind of totally opened my eyes to what was around, instead of being into some pretty dodgy stuff. But I don't know, I guess I was interested really in that pop scene, new romantic scene. That was fascinating for me, and then started to get into this darker metal scene, and a whole lot of the flavours that sort of has in it that I found really intriguing too. Then this whole local thing of real, wow, it's all happening now. These people are down the road and they live there, and it's our flavour of New Zealand music. That was really, that was like something I hadn't experienced before so much. And I think after that, it led me into other areas of contemporary music that weren't so commercial, like looking into the Human Music compilation, and then discovering Big Black and Sonic Youth were still kind of underground at that stage, and then just starting to look into some a bit less obvious musical avenues. That was relatable too, and G.G. Allen, like, wow, this is great, this stuff, and it sort of had that connection back to that punk thing that sort of hooked me right at the beginning, but on some other level. This was really localized, gritty stuff going on. It didn't kind of have the posturing, and it didn't have the angsty flavour. It had something quite, I don't know, more pointed and more sharp and much more carnival in a way. I guess that started to come into it as well. It had the dramatics definitely going on. Then my father said he was going to, him and my mother had split up by this stage, so he was looking, he found work in Australia, in Melbourne, and his mother lived there. So he said to me, you should come and finish school off there, have a fresh start, sort of thing. And he said, you'll have to really, pull finger and do well. And I was like, oh, okay. I just didn't seem like I couldn't do well in those days. I would try really hard and it just all went to shit all the time. So no matter what I did, it was trouble. And then I went to Melbourne and tried to finish school there, but I'd kind of missed out about a year and a half of high school, so it was hard to pick it up they had a HSC, high school certificate, in those days. Well, they called it HSC, and it was just out of my reach. I didn't, So I sort of staggered through that, and I really missed the community of friends I'd had in Christchurch. I remember it being really, really hard to sort of find. I mean, the people were lovely in the school in Melbourne, but it just wasn't lifelong friends like I'd grown up with in Christchurch. And I remember playing a bit of guitar over there and stuff, and people were like, "Oh wow, you can do that." And I don't know, you just don't think of it. You think of it as something you just enjoy and don't take it that seriously. But someone would say, "Oh, you want to play in a band? You want to do this?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I think I was there for about a year, and then came back to New Zealand, and then was around in New Zealand for about another, I don't know, it's a really short time. I think it was about 8 months, but it might have been a wee bit longer. It might have been another year or so. And then I went back to Melbourne. So the time I spent back in New Zealand was in Christchurch, and I was working in kitchens and just being a young dude doing hospitality work and all the drinking and fun that goes with that. And that was another time I remember not doing a lot of music, but going to a party and there was a band playing, and I sort of somehow ended up playing the guitar, and the friends of mine at the time were really like, "Oh, you can do that." I didn't realise that was something you did, and it was, I've had moments like that quite a few times in my life. One was in Thailand when I had a tour with some tour guide, and we went and at the end of the tour we went and ate something together, and we were going through this big sort of store, and there was a guitar shop, and I went in and started to play a guitar, and she said, "Oh, you really love to play the guitar." And that was bizarre because no one had ever seen that side of it before. They just go, "Oh, you can do that," or "Oh, that's something you do," or whatever. But no one had ever said, "Oh, you really love to do it." And that was such a different way of looking at it for me. But anyway, so then I went and moved back to Melbourne in the early 90s, and then I started playing music with some people in a band. We had this sort of Tom Waits cover band that ended up somehow segueing into this kind of almost like a Rolling Stones band. But I was the drummer in that, so it was a really different thing for me to get used to. We turned up to the first gig, and I thought I was going to play the bass, and they got me to set up the drum kit, and I was like trying to figure out how it all went together. And okay, I got it set up thinking someone else was going to play it, and they're like, "No, you're going to play it now." And it's like, "Oh, okay." So that was the first gig. That was the first time really of drumming, was trying to figure it out on stage. And I think a lot of music's like that, and a lot of it's just people falling into this role somehow accidentally, or blagging their way through to this point where they kind of have to do it. It's pretty funny. It's almost like it's a requirement of doing music, is that you can accidentally get your way through, I did a lot of kitchen hand work in different various places, and working in sandwich bars, working in nightclubs, working in general pubs, churning out roast meals for old diggers and stuff like that. And then I started to do a lot of caregiving work, and that really opened my eyes in another way from being... Hospitality is all about quantity and speed and pressure and caregiving work actually almost should be called hospitality, because it's more a true sense of the word. But it's about taking your time and caring and making sure someone's comfortable. And that seemed like the opposite to all the kitchen work I'd done. So I worked for about 3 or 4 different agencies, and I could make up my roster as I wanted. So I could take a 2-hour job on Thursday morning, starting at 5 and going till 7, and then I could have a couple of hours off, and then in the afternoon I could do some more stuff, and I could find a night shift here. And so this whole weird itinerant making up your own schedule thing kind of came out of that. And I was doing a lot of visual art at the time, so I was doing oil painting and printmaking, and that kind of gave me the space to get exhibitions together and show work and develop that side of things. And for quite a while it seemed like music just sort of went and sat down in the background somewhere, and I listened to a lot of it, but I didn't make so much at that time. I mean, I always kept it as a constant thing. There was a friend of mine in Melbourne, Stuart Thomas, and he was a really constant musical. I don't know. He was a companion. He was a collaborator, but he was also something about his approach. I just remember watching him sitting down, and he would have just a guitar, and he would just be working things out on it, and he would be working out a song he didn't know, or he'd be playing a song he knew that he was trying to find new ways around in it, and he was always exploring and always looking further. And in that same way that other friend of mine, Damien Jones, had done that with musical taste, this guy did with musical playing. And it was always just so inspiring to see someone just looking further and always looking further and trying to push things in different directions. So we did a lot of 4-track recording and demoing, and just trying out a lot of experimental recording stuff, like using answer machines on telephones as recording devices, and building up this crazy kind of a world of overdubbing and looping. And that was, I remember just the excitement, like just all night long doing this really strange music and getting in this bizarre worlds of where that can lead you. So we did a lot of that. We played a lot of live gigs. I played bass mainly in those days. I don't know how I did it, because now when I look at the bass guitar, it's so hard. It's one of the instruments I find really, it's invisible what a bass player does. It's such this magic thing that they can do. And I try it, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of working. And then I see an actual bass player doing it, and I'm like, okay, wow, that's what it's meant to be like. So we did these nights at a hard and fast nightclub, really like heavy rock, and we had this little weird chill out room that we'd play these strange gigs in, just try and freak out the bogans, I think, was what we were trying to do. Playing a lot of weird African rhythms and strange dark noir kind of things that we'd been working on. It was cool. I remember really just the freedom of it, like being paid to have this gig once a week that you could just do the weirdest stuff. It was really great. And it was playful too with them. There was a lot of development and looking for ways to do things that you hadn't done them before. And then I moved back to New Zealand in about 98, I think that was, and moved to Auckland, and I started to sing and play the guitar, because like to go back to the guitar felt really natural, but I didn't have a band to play with anymore, so I had to be the source of the music, and singing seemed like a huge part of that. I remember talking to this guy and saying, how do you do it? How do you get into it? And he said, just try and get in a band as a backup singer, and after that you can that'll sort of get you used to it, and then you can start to develop it more from there. And I got a gig for some guy's party because we went and had a camp with the place I was working at, and I took a guitar along and we sort of played songs around the fire. And he really liked this, and he wanted to have a party that was like that. So we put together this Hank Williams band and sort of dragged all these country players together out of nowhere and had it up on top of this apartment building in K Road, and sort of made it look like a hacienda. And I got this pedal steel guitar player to come who just about killed himself getting up to the top of the building. He just wanted to drink like 2 litres of Coca-Cola. As he started running up the stairs, and the handle came out of the trolley that his pedal steel was on, and it just went clonk, clonk, clonk all the way down the stairs, and we just felt horrified. We'll take that, don't worry, you just get yourself up to the top of the building. So he did, and he was just puffing and wheezing, and we thought, what have we done? And then we all set up and he started to play, and we were like, wow, this sounds great, So it was probably a horrible gig, but it was a dream for us, or for me. And so we just had this kind of, this country band that appeared out of nowhere. And then I went down to Papakura and played in the country music competition, which was pretty funny. I've got these notes about needs to open his eyes more and address the audience. Classic marks on performance. And but that was sort of how the singing came into it. The singing was just born out of desperation and necessity. So always there's this feeling with me when I'm singing that it's still kind of this new thing that I'm doing. It wasn't trained, and it's always a bit shaky, and I kind of hear, could be that could be a bit better. But I don't know. People try all sorts of different approaches to singing, and tonally I have some pretty loose benchmarks there with what is in tune and what isn't. And I think a lot about these microtonal things and the idea that perfectly in tune is, I think it's the Indonesians, they talk about when things are in tune, there's nothing for the spirits to catch onto in the music, so the music dies and it becomes dead. And I think that's a lot of it for me, like listening to people singing and hearing what's in tune and what's out of tune. Some of these amazing old horn sections in this old ska music are so out of tune, but that's what's beautiful about it, is that it has this other feeling that's not perfectly in tune. Perfectly in tune can be really useful as well, and it can hit a part of you that nothing else can access, but maybe it's overrated. Usually it was, I liked the recording, and I would try and emulate what I heard in the recording. So for Hank Williams, there was so many recordings of different stuff that he did, and there's this one song, A Teardrop on a Rose, and it was a pretty shitty song. It's pretty schmaltzy. It's about a guy going into a garden and he sees a teardrop on a rose, and that symbolises how he's feeling. And it was really, when I tried to sing it, I realised how it wasn't the strongest song in the world, but something about the recording and the way he sang really got me. And it was the warmth in the microphone sound, and it was the sort of the reverb that he had on the voice that really gave him these really long notes, and he sang specifically for that sound. Like, it wasn't like he sang it the normal way he sings and then they put the reverb on afterwards. It was like that's how he heard it, and he really delivered it into that environment. And I noticed that tripped me up quite a few times. Was I would hear a recording and think, wow, that's really, I want to do that. But then I realised, it's not the song doing that, it's something else. So then I started to think about, I guess that led me into the idea that songs, you can take them wherever you want. And that was definitely opened up in my mind by this, how radical the Johnny Cash's American Recording series that came out by Rick Rubin seemed at the time. Now it's so logical and so obvious. But this idea that you take a song and you deliver it really a different way was quite novel. It seemed to be novel, to me at least, and definitely it took other people by surprise as well. And that was kind of a revelation in a way, to hear, like I just remember how amazed people were that he did a Soundgarden song, and then he did a Nine Inch Nails song. And that was a moment when you realised, wow, take songs where you want. And that brought about some full circle as well of the idea of the songwriter as a different person to the singer. And that's something that keeps getting stronger and stronger in my mind, and I'm sure that's something, it's not just limited to me, but the whole musical comprehension we have as people will take that on stronger too, and we will have artists who just interpret songs again, and they don't write them. We already do, but in a much more secretive way, that you would look up who actually wrote that Adele song and realise, oh, it wasn't her, what a surprise. But do most people know that? Whereas with Frank Sinatra, it was totally obvious that and Billie Holiday and these artists, that they delivered, they didn't create. They created their own interpretation of something, but they hadn't written the song. And I think the interpretation idea led me pretty clearly into the path I feel like I'm quite strongly on now, with definitely the way I see musical ownership and influence as something not to try and hide or disguise or anything. It's something you just let it all go in the same direction. And yeah, that's a contextual thing too, because whenever I perform in Europe, I get a really different response than when I perform in the States. And one thing that keeps striking me about performing in the USA is people think, what's this music and that you do, and how did you make it, and where does it come from? And that blows me away, because to me it's American roots music, blues, country based stuff, folk music. There's a heavy European folk influence in there too, but to them it doesn't sound like American music. And so then I'm like, well, what is that sound to you? Because it's not the chords and it's not the lyrics. And then maybe it's like a production value or something, that they're used to hearing country music that sounds like this. So yeah, that's something that often gets me by surprise. Well, the move to Switzerland was, I was married, so me and my wife, we wanted to move to Switzerland because that's where she came from, and Bern was where her father lived, so we moved there. And the idea was to get a bit more of a taste of the world, but little did I realise there was the Voodoo Rhythm Records family community was based in Bern, and that was amazing, because that was such a look for me at, again, another whole world of music that I kind of hadn't figured out before, and this extremeness of the recordings and the really overdriven attitude towards 129%, Reverend Beatman, Creed, all that stuff. It just became, so, I just gravitated completely towards it, and then started to sort of work with the people who were involved in that label, and then joined the Dead Brothers as a drummer, and started to, once we sort of had a bit of a shaky lineup. I had people coming and going, but then it settled into this 4 person lineup, and that produced about two albums that were really succinct and had this beautiful kind of flavour. Somehow Americana meeting with European folk music, and that was I think there the drums kind of blurred into lap steel guitar, trombone, singing, songwriting, all this. Everyone just started putting stuff in, and these albums came out of that. And I started also working with a lot of other bands in Voodoo Rhythm Records, and did guest spots with these guys, and helped out here and there with lots of stuff. And just watching the way Beatman worked as this kind of one-man powerhouse of design, production, songwriting, performing, and also the way he could facilitate other people's albums and keep a label going was just, totally another one of these people you see, you're just like, wow, it's hugely inspiring to see somebody just kicking it along at that kind of rate. I think he was putting out one album a month for a while, just going like hell, and I really liked that input. I remember talking to another really good friend of mine, and he said, we were talking about the Stones, and he was saying, yeah man, I mean, these guys, they put out an album every 6 months, and I just thought, that's fucking great. Why aren't we doing that? And the reason we aren't doing that is because people are worried about marketing and saturating the market. Again, it's that thing of money dictating the flow of the energy, and it's just wrong. It shouldn't be like that. So I've tried to, I've been thinking a lot about that too, especially in this time we live in now of digital release, and wondering if my idea of the album is outdated and I should be not so fixated on a 45 roughly minute collection of songs, a body of work in that format. Should I think about EPs? Should I think about singles? Probably I should, but I don't know, the album idea is still irresistible somehow to me. It's such a beautiful length. So I mean, that's one way to get around this idea of oversaturating or worrying about a market release like that, would be to just start churning out an EP every 4 months or something like that. And the idea of working on 4 songs at once is quite appealing. Always with an album, there's a couple of things you're like, should that really be there? But those are the little unwanted siblings that somehow give it the family vibe, It's not going to be all pure. It has to have the runt part of the litter, And I remember saying this thing to myself, okay, if there's ever going to be a choice between anything, just choose music. That's the way to do it. Streamline it down like that. And that means you lose a lot and you gain a lot, and it simplifies the thing down. So it seemed like that became my way of operating, and I just did it that way. I'm not sure if it was that sensible, and I'm sure I could have done a better business model for myself, but I mean, for me it was still, and then it was and is still, heavily about just being immersed in the music, finding where it takes you, and being there to enjoy it. Someone had a loop machine at a studio I was at, and they were like, I think it was a delay simulator, tape delay simulator, and I was curious about it, and they kind of showed me how to do it, and I just remember it was like with that punk band when Anarchy in the UK took off with the 3 of us. It was kind of like that. It was like, this is great. So suddenly all the experience of drumming, guitar playing, singing, all that stuff that I'd done before just all gelled together in this moment. And I just remember like playing something, just about 20 minutes of this loop thing, and then realizing the possibilities on the guitar and what that could do. So I did a lot. I just booked these tours all over Europe doing that, and I toured on the train, I would be probably writing songs on the train, and then I would get to the town I was going to, and I would get covers printed up on the copy shop at the station, burn off CD compilations of demos I'd made during the sound check, package them up, sell them after the show, and just had this kind of rolling lifestyle where everything seemed like it was tied into the songwriting and the music. And then through doing that, I slowly started to figure my way into a bass octaver, so that the percussion side of what I was playing on the guitar could be maximized, and then playing through a guitar amp and a bass amp, so splitting the signal and using the guitar amp for all the highs and the bottom amp for all the lows, so then there was no prioritization of the amp, and you could have each one doing exactly what they're meant to do, and the sound was really full, it didn't drop away. And then the bullet mic came into play, and then all these little things just started to add together to this really holistic kind of a little machine that it could do so much stuff. And then just refining things over the years with using the PA as the bass system. So last tour I just had a little Vox Pathfinder and a DI, and just used the bass in the PA as the grunty rhythm side, and that's so minimal that way. So that was that was sort of like this blueprint somehow of how to strip everything back to this one person and just go for it. Each night's different, each night's totally adaptable to where you're at. That was kind of I always saw the Dead Brothers after that. I kind of looked at the Dead Brothers as the apprenticeship, or the post-school educational. That was my tertiary period, was those 3 years with those guys, and then I graduated on to doing my own stuff after that. And some guy, he saw me, he goes, you maximized your shit, man. Like, everything was so functional, and each thing had its purpose, and it was really nice to just go, yeah, fuck it. It's at that point where each thing is essential. And working with Marlon was great because it had this I always had this feeling of possibility, and had this it had this great competitive kind of a tug of war between the cliched idea, the shining youth, and the older decrepit flavour, naivety versus world weariness, and this constant backwards and forward that it could do. That was also good because I think somewhere it felt like Marlon's made that decision that I'd made as well, that okay, this is it, it's music, that's what it's about for us. So you had that feeling that that's what's important, and that was really nice to have a collaborator that had that same kind of focus, or that intense relationship with music. Tammy's someone else who I think working with her, it was great, the sort of the robust positivity she brings. And I definitely remember first starting to work with her, it felt like, whoa, there's some fun on the stage, and that really changed things around. Like she's got an infectious enjoyment of stuff that's really, really great. She's also great to write with, like producing that album of hers. The first one, there was there was some quite big gaps in the song list that we needed, and we just wrote like about three of these songs in one afternoon. They just were like bam, and as soon as they were written, we were recording them 20 minutes later in the studio, still kind of writing them, and that was really exciting, just the pace that happened. That was really she's a great collaborator to work with. I remember we did this show in Devonport together, with Marlon and me and her, and we thought, let's do some covers, and she suggested some songs like Jackson, and I can't remember these songs, and I just thought, no way, that's too boring, that's too obvious. We should find some, like, sing an Otis Redding song, and started to change it, to try and get her to do You'll Never Walk Alone, like classic Torch songs, and taking it away from the country vibe into something bigger and more open to interpretation, and something that lets you stretch out as a singer as well, because she needs that space to stretch into. And I think she kind of, that was the moment she went, wow, you kind of get what I'm about. And I remember thinking, why isn't that what you present to people? Because that's the true, that's what you want to be showcasing, is that side of what you do. And I hadn't seen it till then. It didn't seem like that was sort of what was on offer, but it seemed like the logical way to go. I often think about that with production, because I think it's about seeing the essence you think, or a side that you think hasn't been seen, and then bringing that into the light, focusing the light on that, showing that facet of that person. I think with a lot of self-production, and I know I've fallen in the trap myself, is you just can't see what someone who's not busy can see. And I definitely remember recording with Tammy's album, there was times when the band was playing and they were just kind of messing around with the rough idea of the song, and they had it. And so we sort of, me and Ben Edwards, like, just record that. Yeah, cool. And sitting there talking, and then they go, fuck man, we just don't have it. This is bullshit. Fuck the song. And you're like, just keep moving, just do something else. And then later on, after that day, going, that was that song, and they're like, wow, that's it. That is the vibe, that is the feeling, that's the groove. So that was really, for me, that was a massive eye opener, and I was really grateful for Tammy to ask me to do that and give me that opportunity to be not one of the players but one listening. And this it's interesting that, because I always had this feeling like I feel like I'm not doing anything, I feel lazy, I feel like I'm a charlatan, I'm in the wrong place, all this stuff. And then afterwards you go, oh, there's no way that would have sounded like that without someone who just was hands off and just thinking and listening and trying to find it. So I think production's a really interesting area for that, because it's so much about the esoterics of songwriting, arrangement, how you record it. All that stuff becomes really, really important, and it's it's a strange narrow path to walk, because you're not the engineer and you're not a musician. You're somewhere sort of going between these two worlds and trying to connect them, but trying to also find the way to get the right current flowing between them. I've found now I can nearly listen to anything and go, oh, I can hear what my touch would do to that, and that's interesting. Sometimes things are, you don't want to put that in there, and obviously you still enjoy things, but you can always click that part of yourself on where you think, yeah, I would have done it this way. Or Manasta Chungo is the project me and my partner Nicole have, and that's it's kind of like her flavours blended with my flavours. So there's a lot of this Spanish cumbia, and definitely the whole world her singing brings. And then there's my sort of looping, there's a bit of that. There's songwriting stuff from me. It's hard to find a balance with that because it's not so much, it's not my song. It is my songs, but it's not purely my songs. And so we often have to find the way to take the songs forward both at the same time. So it's not just me going, oh yeah, there's 10 more songs and we could do these. And it's like, yeah, sure we could, but that's not really what that project's about. And one thing we did want to keep open with this project is the idea of playfulness and exploration. So we're always looking for possibilities to collaborate with hip hop, for example, or with mariachi bands, or fuller extended rhythm sections, things like that. Those are what we want to explore with it. And we wanted it to be kind of light, but at the same time serious, and have this playful, upbeat thing, but be a bit sort of menacing at the same time. So we're still exploring a lot of that. There's a lot of stuff I've tried to free up from to be able to take that musical step. Started trying to write some rap lyrics and just really opening up ideas of how I work music wise, that's great, you know. Any challenge like that's always, it's going to bring some laughs at the very least. Yeah. It sometimes feels like one hand, like holding the handbrake on and the accelerator at the same time, because you're trying to figure out how to motivate it and push it, but how not to dominate it too much. It's quite a delicate game, but it's brought some real I guess it's another one of those projects that's brought about a change musically for me, and that feels nice to look further into animation on stage, and the idea of it being upbeat and groovy, something to dance to, and that's definitely comes out of the it's a combination of that sort of chunkier blues thing and the Mexican rhythm combined with this sort of cumbia flavour from Brazil. The other thing is just working with somebody else is different, because if you're by yourself and you write a song about poor old me, you kind of can get away with it. But if you're doing it with someone else, the other person will be like, what the fuck's that shit, man? What are you talking, you know? So it's good to have someone to drag you out of your own sort of quagmire. I think I do that for her, and I think she does that for me too, musically. There's times we try and lighten it up because it can get a bit on the heavy side. It still feels like that's such an untapped, or just a barely scratched surface that we're starting to get into, and I've had some talks with Beatman in Switzerland about a movie we want to make. And then doing this Black Rider performance recently, I started to go, I think maybe this movie should be a musical in a darker form of what that would mean. So the graphic side of it, I mean, for me it's always been a question or an issue. I'd never liked seeing a band get up with tracksuit trousers and running shoes on or whatever. I always preferred it to see somebody who's dressed for the show, and you're like, okay, that's a big side of what they're presenting, is the formal side of it, and the idea that there's a musician's uniform, which is a suit. You know, I like that idea. It takes it to the music to this classic sort of form. But then there's this other side that we started to look into with Manastel Chango, where it's urban. So maybe there's a song in a tracksuit, which is not what I would have ever imagined, but somehow that suddenly brings a whole new world into my aesthetic language, you know, and that's a great thing. It's got so much in it, just the idea of a tracksuit. It could be urban London, it could be Eastern Europe, it could be anywhere, you know, the idea of what that brings, that kind of a uniform, as opposed to the tie, the shirt, button-down collar, all that stuff that I generally tend to wear. And maybe it's also a hark back to a much younger mentality than I'm generally playing, being of a certain age and having a certain kind of a era in my aesthetic. This is definitely a new flavour there. I always think about this idea with tango dancing. You have your arms here, and then you have this hand up here, and the person you're dancing with is meant to keep up quite a strong pressure so you can read each other, and that's where you go, now I'm going to go this way, come back this way with me, this way. You can, that and the hand on the back is how you kind of steer the person around. But if they don't keep up that pressure with you, it's like you don't have the relation there that you want. And collaboration should be like this. And definitely on stage you can see some people who, when they have a collaborator, they pick up and they step into this other world, and when they're on stage by themselves they get a bit flaccid and they lose that relationship, and they sprawl somehow. I mean, ultimately the best idea would be to collaborate with the audience, because then you have that intense idea of where I end and you begin, but we're playing with that idea, and we are moving that with a pressure between us that makes us feel like we have a relationship together. When the Dead Brothers were kind of together, I know they were together then, we played the Threepenny Opera in the Stadttheater in Basel, and that was obviously that's a musical, so that's big theatre, so that's the classic Basel dramatic theatre they have there, and that was amazing, like just to work for such a big institution and to be stuck in these warrens under the stages of which rehearsal rooms we're in, and onto the stage, off the stage. That was great, and they had quite a long season. They had about 3 months, I think, and we would sort of disperse. We did quite a heavily intensive, maybe 6-week rehearsal period to start off, and then we had the 3-month season that kind of came and went. So they would have a week on, and then time off, and then 3 days here, and so this sort of, these musicians would all sort of turn up to Basel and have another couple of shows and then disperse and then come back together. And that was really nice, and that's a great part about theatre work is the ensemble you build and the dynamics of a new group of people who are excited to get to know each other and enjoy what they discover, and enjoying time together, because you've done the rehearsals, you know each other well, and then you go away and have your own life, and then you'll come back together, and it's like, it's a bit reunion flavour that can be really nice. So that was a really, really great experience for me. I did a couple of theatre shows in Bern in Switzerland, and they were much smaller scale, but still very, very highly focused. And they were also still playing very musically based, so they were not really getting into the acting world of it. But then this latest Black Rider piece that we've been doing is, for me, the strongest step out of being a musician and into being an actor and actually playing a role on a stage, singing without an instrument and delivering dialogue and lines, and sometimes just a presence on the stage without the help of a musical instrument at all. And the only other time I did something that dramatic was when I played in a movie. It was the main role in The Road to Nod, which was a jailbird road drama movie that we put together with Slowboat Pictures in Frankfurt, Germany. So we filmed, started in Ireland and then moved down to Holland and drove across to Germany, filming the whole way. So that was also completely unmusical and just dramatic. But I like this Black Rider thing because it's expressionist acting, and so everything's much larger than life, and you can do a lot. You can ham it up, which is, I think, I love that side of it because it just brings the humour into it, and I think humour is a massive side of music. If you can introduce it in a small little thread or as a really something funny, it's this amazing magic that can ease so many situations and translates it into it transcends so many things. Humour, it's really valuable. I don't think it's used as much as it could be, and maybe that's why it feels so magical, because it's so sparse. But you notice when it happens, it can open all these doors that nothing else can go near. I was at the Country Music Awards in Gore, and this guy did this song called "The Mongrel Flogged Me Jumper," or "The Mongrel Flogged My Jersey," and it's a song from a sheep's point of view about being shorn. And he played it live, and the whole audience was just laughing and really into it, and just cheered when he finished the song. And it just obviously was such a way to connect everybody up. And then other people come out and they sing their songs, and they're kind of about love gone wrong, or it just didn't cut through and just didn't connect in the same way. But this guy totally should have won, I reckon. Just you could feel it in the audience how powerful it was, and it was light. It was a light and powerful thing to do, and it really connected everybody up. But it didn't win the prize. That was a shame. But humour, I always used to think about humour like if you got someone started to threaten you and you got in a heavy situation, if you could just make a joke, and that would diffuse everything. And using humour as a way to disarm people and get closer somehow. Ultimately, that's what you're trying to do. You want to get closer, and you want to sneak in, or you want to open up the doors between people. And humour is a really good way to do that. It's irresistible, and it'll break down the toughest people in a way that it's like a surprise attack in a way. It sneaks up. It's hard to pull off because it's so, when it goes wrong, it's horrible. No one wants to know about it. Well, the Threepenny Opera, that definitely lifted a lot of technical game of mine, because you couldn't make noise. It was a very slick production, so I had to get gold-plated cables to plug in, so there was no buzz anymore, and there was, this was really like, well, okay, how the hell is this going to work? But somehow it worked. And then the other performances and the music for them has helped too, because you see this whole other way of looking at music that's not song driven, it's just sound. And the Dead Brothers did a lot of that. Like, we did this show, at the end of every show we would go into the crowd and we would do a couple of songs acoustic. And one song we did it's a Marlene Dietrich song, and it has a solo in the middle where someone plays a really quiet accordion solo, and then whatever noise was happening in the room filled in the spaces. And I remember just like turning this ashtray around on a table, and it made this screeching kind of a noise, and that was the solo, was that and a accordion. So this sort of stuff, suddenly this really intense focus on small noises, that's a huge part of the way theatre music works. And the idea as well of theatre music is you almost don't want to know what's making the noise. So if someone's doing weird sounds on a drum kit, as soon as you hear the hi-hat go, psh, you're like, that's a drum kit. But the more time you can spend making noise on these things, and people don't actually know, is that a double bass or a clarinet or a cymbal being scraped. What the hell is that noise? It's just making the atmosphere. That's to me the theatrical side of it, and that's definitely something I build into the live show that I do with some of the songs that get more sonically abstract, and suddenly you're like, what is this environment? It's telling a story, and each sound has a real purpose. It is a character, it is a part of the story, and it comes in to help you develop that picture. I think that's been really hugely valuable, and definitely something after my own heart, to start to approach music this way, that it tells stories and it's characters. It's not just anything else almost seems dead in a way. I used to think of distortion as making things louder, but I've come to see it as actually often makes things quieter, because you blur the clarity of something, so you don't have such a pointed presence of it anymore. That also makes it porous, which makes it nicer to become part of as a listener, because in order for you to integrate with things, they have to have some holes in them, otherwise they're just a surface you bounce off. Seeing Del McCoury and his bluegrass band playing out in the middle of a paddock at sort of midnight, out in the sort of quite deep countryside of Tennessee, at a festival full of tattooed, rowdy rednecks, and watching them, just the religious feeling that come over this crowd, and the reverence, and how they all just totally calmed down and watched this show. And that was a mind-blowing thing, to see just music and how distilled it can be. This is a family. This is the grandfather, his nephews, his cousin, his son, all playing in this group, playing music that's written around these parts, in this parts, to people who live in these parts. And that was something else. That was really amazing, especially having sung that song, Get on Your Knees and Pray, so many times with Marlon, and then hearing Del McCoury playing it. Was like, wow, this is really incredible. I think that show finished and I kind of couldn't even talk anymore. I just had to go and get in the car and drive sort of an hour back to the town I was staying in. Yeah, it was Muddy Roots Festival. That was they have the Melvins played, and Bonnie Prince Billy played, and all these sort of, it was a really weird combination for a festival. Fantastic lineup, but a lot of it was harder driven, heavier music, and these guys, just how light it was, and how the beautiful way they played. Like, they just came on and they did a couple of songs, and then they said, right, now's usually the time we take requests. Anyone got anything they want to hear? And everyone was like, oh my God, this. And then they did those, and then they got to the point and they said, now we do the gospel songs. And they played these beautiful songs, and yeah, incredible. Great show. It was like a funeral. Like, Del McCoury had, he was all in white, and everybody else in the band was in black, and they were just behind him. And yeah, amazing. Great show. That was a revelation. Some revelations happen that they aren't musical based. They're just, they just happen. Being given a guitar, that was a big moment. Moving back from Melbourne was another junction, it felt like, because I was moving away from sort of the whole musical thing I had around me, the network that I had. And I remember telling Kim Salmon, oh yeah, I'm going to move back to New Zealand, he just looked at me like, what the fuck? You know? Like things were just starting to pick up for this band I was in. He just sort of looked at me like, what a dick. What are you doing that for? You know? But I think that definitely led into the solo thing that wouldn't have been so strong otherwise. And then another career or another signpost was definitely moving to Switzerland and connecting with this Voodoo Rhythm family. Leaving the Dead Brothers, that was another one of these things. And the earthquake that happened here in Littleton was another huge junction point, because I just decided that morning, I changed my ticket to stay in New Zealand for longer, and then this earthquake happened, and that just led to so much stuff with the music we made here, and a really different approach to songwriting, working a lot more with other people, and that kind of harbour union thing that was formed out of that. And also sort of deepening the work me and Marlon were doing. That felt like it all added up. Yeah, sometimes it feels like there's things calling you to junctions, and sometimes you just are at junctions, and sometimes there's a junction over there if you want to go to it, and there'll be a choice, but you're not always taking those choices, you know. Sometimes you ignore them, you just keep on going. Don't make a choice. Just follow the default setting. I'm never sure about punk, what it means. Everybody talks about it as a 15-minute moment at a party that happened in America somewhere, and then other people think it was the whole fashion movement from Malcolm McLaren and what that meant. And then when you look at it, it's just like rock and roll. It's the same old thing, but a bit more dressed up. But then the idea of punk was around before those things happened anyway, so I guess it's a misfit, the idea of some angular, sharp, cornered misfit that's a bit dirty, perverse, somehow deformed. And inept, but convinced, convicted. Yeah, it has the power of conviction that drives it through its own misfit ineptitude to prove once again that it's not really ability that is important, it's attitude, or it's bluff or staunching things out, or it's a nice concept. I always had this thought, if I stop this tomorrow, who would give a fuck? No one, you know, because it's me doing it all myself, so it's self-driven, self-managed, self-motivated, and there's not someone else going, yeah man, this is really cool, we're going to do this tomorrow, we're going to do that, next week we're going to do that, I've got these plans for you next month, and we're aiming at this for next year. It's just me going, oh, I wonder if that could possibly happen next year. Like with me, I feel like there's been this success on an artistic level, but I see this other place people operate in, which is a far more commercially successful way they run their business or the way they operate. And part of me wonders about that, like if I'm lucky to have not had that in a way. And I see that as it really cuts people down, and it's too much for a lot of people. I had a big talk to a friend of mine in Switzerland who was saying they had a big talk with their band. There's 4 of them in it, 3 are brothers, and the drummer's not, and he's not related to them. So they have families, and they do so many gigs a year. And if they did any more gigs a year, they would have to give up their jobs. But to do those, to make the money that they would make with their jobs, the amount of gigs they would do would have to grow to this much. So that would mean they miss out on a whole lot of their family life. It would mean a whole lot of pressure. It would probably mean the end of the band. So for where they are, they're in the perfect place. They got it exactly as good as it could possibly get without tipping over too far into one side or falling backwards into the other. So to know that you are at that place, that's perfect for them. I wonder about that in relation to me too. Like I often look at taking on a manager, how that would work, what that would mean, where that would go commercially, what that would do to my brand, how it would compromise what I would see I had to do, or what we would have to start to do to try and lift it to this certain thing. And I look at where I'm at and think, I can afford to live, I've got a house I can live in, I've got food, I can do what I want mostly. It's pretty good, and I'm doing what I want, so what would you want to change? So it's a strange thing. I guess everybody builds and builds and wants more and more, and that's the way to do it. And my other thing is like, what's going to happen to me when I get old? Will I have security to help me stay alive, or what support will be there for me out of my whatever you call that? But I don't have a superannuation or anything I'm working towards, so I don't know. Will I be able to keep doing this music for as long as I want to? Ultimately, I'd love to be doing it for as long as I can. It's not like I'm going to stop when I'm 60 or anything like that.